Hello, my name is Miszek Piskorski. I'm a professor of digital strategy, analytics, and innovation at IMD Business School with campuses in Lausanne and in Singapore. Today, I'm joined by Ralf Herbst, who is a chief strategy officer at AskBio, a gene therapy company wholly owned and independently operated as a subsidiary of Bayer, a German life sciences company. Before joining the AskBio executive team, Herbst was an executive at Bayer, where he contributed to expanding the organization's cell gene therapy capabilities, including Bayer's cell and gene therapy platform. Ralf, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Ralf, we're going to talk about a number of things that are very familiar to you, but quite unfamiliar to our viewers and our listeners. Give us a crash course in cell and gene therapy before we move forward.
Oh yeah, happy to do so. I think when we think about life on planet Earth, we all know from our biology classes in school maybe that life consists of cells. So that's where I want to start this short introduction to cell and gene therapy. In living human beings or in organisms, as I said, the cell is a key part of us being alive. And there are indications or diseases where a cell or the cells get compromised and lose their function over time. And the approach in cell therapy is to provide these target organs, these target tissues, with new healthy cells that integrate into these tissues and replace the cells that have lost their function, so to regenerate the function of that tissue or that organ. That's basically the idea of cell therapies. And one of the companies that Bayer has invested in is BlueRock Therapeutics, that leverages this approach in Parkinson's disease, where dopaminergic neurons in the human brain play a key role, and where they lose in Parkinson's disease their function over time. And there is an approach now in clinical development where these cells get replaced, new dopaminergic neurons are added to the human brain, and they integrate back. And with that, we try to regenerate function. Now, going to gene therapy, this is happening even on a more granular level. This is happening when cells still have their function, but there is a genetic code missing or faulty on the cell level. And you don't need to replace the whole cell, but you need to provide that right genetic information. And in gene therapy, you are doing that. You are providing genetic information on the cell level to restore that genetic code and make the cells fully functional again. So this is happening on a more granular level, as I've tried to explain. And adeno-associated virus, so-called AAV, play a key role in this.
So I'm very excited about these developments. As you know, and many of us know, this has a tremendous promise to revolutionize the way we do healthcare. I know that you have personally embarked on a very, very long 10-year journey to become really at the top and leading many of these efforts. Tell us how this journey started for you as a leader, what prompted it, and what were some of the first steps that you undertook in order to put yourself on this career path?
Yeah, this actually really goes back 10 years. 10 years ago, I was a part of still, at that time, a subsidiary of Bayer that was called Bayer Technology Services. It was a technology provider to Bayer, but also to other companies in the chemical and pharmaceutical industry. And before that, I had even been in the polymer and chemicals divisions of the group, and done several roles in from technology development to business development to marketing and sales. But I really wanted to make that transition into the life science part. And in 2014, I was part of a IMD class where we were exposed by one of your fellow colleagues to really the trends that are happening on a global scale. And the biotech revolution was one trend that I got more and more aware of and got more and more intrigued. So that external perspective, what's happening on the world, what's happening on a global scale, and what new opportunities are arising with that really intrigued me, and that really motivated me to think about a transition into the life science part. But that was just the first step. It took many more steps. It took colleagues and discussions to find that right entry. And that only happened then for me in 2016 when I joined the pharmaceutical division of Bayer.
And I know that you wrote your one-page mission statement for yourself, which basically outlined the journey that you were going to embark on for the next 8 years. Share more what was actually in that mission statement, who contributed to that, and perhaps what were some things that you felt that were going to be quite a big stretch as you set out to achieve what's in your mission statement?
Yeah, this also goes back to an invite that I had to an IMD class that was also organized by our company Bayer at that time to develop leaders in the company, and it was jointly with lots of peers of mine who joined that in 2016, 2017. And we were working in peer groups and reflecting on our motivation of what makes us tick, what's the aspirations that we have. And part of that exercise was also, as you said, this personal mission statement. And for me, with the exciting stories of colleagues that I could listen to at that time, I also thought about myself, what can I really contribute, and what can I contribute also on a longer time frame, because that's really what I'm interested in, to kind of create something that's sustainable and that really gives a future for an organization. And so my personal mission statement was around pushing the boundaries of the organization, really getting into new areas, seeking innovation. And as I said, these external trends, these external opportunities intrigued me. So that also became part of that mission statement. How can we harvest the biotech revolution, and what can we make with it?
Are there any parts of your mission statements that you still remember that were really places where you felt, man, I'm not quite sure I'm going to reach those aspirations, but I'm going to try anyway?
Well, I think the key statement that is still in my mind is that notion of pushing the boundaries. And that what really stuck and really still sticks with me, because that's what we are still doing. We are pushing the boundaries of medicine, of therapeutic approaches, and we are making them work for patients. And that is a really long-term investment and long-term journey. So you really need to be in there for the long haul to really also harvest all the investment. And it's not just about money, it's about personal commitments, as you said, commitments of many people who, some of them have dedicated their whole professional life to make this work.
There's a couple of different ways in which you could have proceeded from there, given your background. There was one route, it was more of a scientific route. There was one route where you sort of acted as a go-between between the scientific community and the business community, or think more of this from a kind of accelerating the business impact. Which of the three routes have you taken? Why and where have they led you?
Yeah, so I have taken the approach of forming a network of people who are really interested in exploring this space. So this goes back into the year of 2018, if I remember. At that year, I was asked, Ralf, from our company leadership, please go explore that cell and gene therapy space. And it was really an open question. And I looked at myself and I reflected and said, I'm not the one guy who can make this work. We need lots of people looking out and looking into that space, knowledgeable people with scientific background, but also people with business background, or people with background in understanding global trends or understanding the regulatory environment that we are working in as a life science company. So in the year 2018, we formed a so-called initiative that we called Cell and Gene Therapy Activator, CGTA, and that became an acronym that really held us together, because we wanted to activate our company's energy to move into that field. How do you activate the energy of a big organization? You need to find a compelling reason or a compelling goal or objective that you want to pursue. So that was the medical revolution, or the new medical opportunities that cell and gene therapies can provide. So we really made the group and the company curious about this field. And at the same time, you have to develop an approach. How can you actually go into that? We called it accelerated, because we did not want to take slow steps, but we wanted to make fast steps. And that already in the first year, it became clear that outside our mother organization, Bayer, there are many organizations or groups of people who have already a lifetime of experience in that field. And we need to work together with them. We need to find collaborations. We need to find partnerships. So entering with a partnering approach, with finding people who really know and have created the field, that was part of that mission in 2018. And that, I think, came through over time. But let's explore how we did that.
So that's fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about some of the early breakthroughs that you had with these people that you found outside of the organizations, and how did you leverage these breakthroughs to continue to accelerate the initiative?
So I think one of the first breakthroughs was really finding people in the organization who worked on this in the so-called cell and gene therapy activator on a voluntary basis in their, like, let's say, evening hours after their normal job. And with that, you already see there's lots of dedication in the colleagues who have joined you. And there were people, if I remember correctly, from the West Coast in the US to Europe to Asia that contributed already in that network at that early stage. People who come with a scientific background. One colleague I remember who came as a cell therapist and with a neurology background. Relatively fresh from the university in the Bayer Research Organization at that point in time, and who was from the very get-go very knowledgeable in understanding what cell therapies actually do and how you can deploy them. There are other people who brought a very, very well-educated picture on, okay, but you also need to manufacture these therapies going forward. So what are actually the new manufacturing processes and technologies that we would need to deploy? So also on that end of the business, it would be new for us as an organization. And finally, also the regulatory framework, the business models, how you deploy this down the road, because the therapies have a kind of a long-term regenerative potential. So they are not going to be prescribed on a monthly or regular basis, but they are more or less one-time treatments. So you can reflect that the business model will also look different going forward. So I think the first step really of success was forming that team, and with that team having lots of people who contribute, and with that team also gaining visibility of the question and the opportunity we are pursuing, because everyone was speaking to their other colleagues, was speaking to their superiors, was speaking to colleagues. So the involvement of people, I think, went already in that first year above 100, maybe 200, 300 people that directly or indirectly were contributing, were listening, were voicing their opinion, were giving their insights.
So given just how big this team of contributors was and how distributed it was, how did you manage this? And maybe next you can tell us a little bit more about how you actually managed some of the potential resistance in your organization towards these new set of ideas that you were working on.
Yeah, again there, how did we manage the group? I think I have to say we, because there was a core group of maybe 5 to 10 people, and there was one colleague, a very good program manager actually, who also shared with us and gave to us his program management methods. And by just having a regular course of meetings, having topics that we wanted to explore, and bringing these topics back to the core team at least, and sharing them and discussing them, so that we are organized as a team, that we are exploring certain angles of cell and gene therapies as I've laid out, bringing it back to the team, building the knowledge, also building consensus, what you do with that information, and coming to the conclusion in the end, well, you can't really build this from inside only. You need to partner with the people who really have created this new science, this new field of therapeutic opportunities. That was a consensus in that team. And having that as a consensus in a broader team, again, the team speaks with many people in the company, started to really plant or help to plant the seed of this opportunity. But I also remember another, let's say, a trick that we pursued at the end of the first year, because we wanted to raise the attention for this. And I remember again, it was a colleague who gave me that idea. He came with the idea to say, well, we can actually create a pitch event here for some highly ranked consulting companies. You know the names, I won't mention them here. but the consulting companies who really work on strategy development with board levels. And we said, we have an idea here, and you may work with us, but we have no money to give. We just have insights to give. We can share our insights, you can share your insights, you will learn about this field too. And if you work with us for a quarter, for 3 months, again, there is no money we can pay, but you will gain great insights and you will gain exposure also to our leaders in the company. And so for a quarter at the end of 2018 and at the beginning of 2019, we get that very professional support to really shape our ideas, to put them, in a way that we can communicate and position them very well. And again, this group of people, the consultants, were working on the executive level and spreading the information and gaining some interest. So really then in 2019, we could accelerate.
That actually brings me to my next question, which is, what was the relationship to the team to the senior leaders at the company? What kind of support were you able to get? And again, what kind of questions were you getting from that team?
Well, I have to say, in that period of time, there were also new leaders on the executive level, especially on the pharmaceutical division, that were sponsors from the very, very beginning. So these 1 or 2 or 3 executive level sponsors we had from very early on. But it was, of course, to gain more of that interest on that level, so that is not just 1 or 2 or 3 highly ranked executive sponsors, but more of them to really make it a consideration for the company. I think that was the intent at that time, but I really want to make sure we understand, yes, this executive leadership is also needed.
And I seem to remember that at that point also Bayer started a big interest in lighthouse projects, right? So this also was established, if I remember, as one of the lighthouse projects.
Well, I think if that's the angle you want to explore, in 2019 there was already the so-called Leaps by Bayer arm working, and Leaps by Bayer, these are I think it was at that time 10 moonshots on exploring new scientific opportunities that can bring new solutions to the life science, both on the crop protection or crop side of the Bayer business, but also on the therapeutic side. And at that time in 2019, there was already an investment of Bayer in the BlueRock company, not a full investment, not a full ownership, but a minority stake. And in 2019, then we were asked to really explore that further and explore if we should acquire that company. And finally, the decision was made to acquire BlueRock, and that was really then the first stepping stone, because that was the first significant investment into a cell therapy company, and it came also with that model of arm's length relationship, because we wanted to pursue that scientific leadership, or we wanted to protect it and keep it going, and also that fast decision making, that entrepreneurial spirit that we had in BlueRock and that we wanted to preserve. So an arm's length model where really the leadership of the company really stays intact, and the company agrees on their strategy with Bayer, of course, because Bayer is funding this. So the direction of the company has to be clear and fully supported. But then delivering the strategy, that's a task of then this selected group of people. And it created a role model that was important going forward, because that arm's length model, as you also mentioned in your introduction, was key to convince then others that this is a new opportunity also for partnering.
So thank you for walking us through the corporate journey, but I do want to come back to your own personal journey. Tell us what happens in 2020. How, as you take stock of your achievements so far, as you compare yourself to the mission, where do you stand, and what are some of the key things that you personally want to achieve going forward from 2020?
Well, for me, in 2020, my personal reflection was, and then again in a group of people, there is more space to explore, and there is more already clinical stage proof points. And that's very much in the gene therapy space. So we found that gene therapy space, because clinical trials, clinical results actually even first products, therapies that were close to an approval for a market authorization were visible. And so we wanted to go into an area where there is even more proof points of really clinical results. And that's the gene therapy space. And that leads me, I think, to how do you get into that, a reflection, let's say my personal reflection on how do you get into that. When we analyzed that space, we saw different options, and very strong organizations with strong scientific founders working in that field, and also smaller organizations working in that field who were maybe not tackling the gene therapy opportunity in such a holistic way, but more from a very narrow perspective. And so we had to really explore where we want to go. And from a leadership, I think, perspective, the reflection I can offer is you need to look at the different options that are out there. And you also have to dive deep on one or two of the options before you really understand what you're talking about. So let's say as a leadership reflection, I would offer, we were diving deep on 2 or 3 opportunities, but in the end we learned they were not the right ones. But that put us in a perfect situation to then really explore the right opportunity, because we knew what we were searching for, we knew what it was about, we knew what the risks are in that area, and we then found that opportunity where it was a really, really good match.
And so tell us a little bit more about this opportunity, how you made a transition and where it took you.
Well, I think that this is the AskBio opportunity, and I think cutting a long story short, AskBio is really tackling the gene therapy opportunity very holistically. It's based on, let's say, 40 years of research of a scientific founder, Jude Samulski, who is the founder of the company and today still the chief scientific officer. And he has explored how AAVs really work, how they deliver this genetic information on the cell level towards different organs, towards different tissues, and how, there are different actually versions of the AAVs who have specific properties. And that's the one dimension of it. The other dimension is, of course, making it safe and providing the data that this is actually a safe area to pursue. Finally, then to find the right therapeutic indications and approaches, and making the manufacturing work, because we all know these are complex biological entities. They are living organisms. A virus, is not just a molecule. It's more complex, and you have to make that work on a manufacturing scale. So that really leads me into this, again, personal reflection. I wanted to contribute that this really is going to work on the technical level, on the business level, on a holistic level, because there are so many things we need to bring in place to make this a success, also from a business perspective. And that's why over the past 2 years, I have worked more and more with the AskBio teams in strategy development, in resourcing of the strategy, in creating the right business cases, in creating the right business information around, and then working with the team to fine-tune our strategy and hopefully make it work. So my motivation was to go there and work on the ground.
As you were choosing to join AskBio, there is a number of reasons why you felt the attraction. You could have felt that the underlying technology was superb, the founder was a very exciting person to work with, or the commercial success was almost unlimited. Talk a little bit more about what attracted you to the company, and perhaps more importantly also, what you felt you were going to be able to contribute to their success.
It's of course the technology, it's of course the opportunity, but finally it's the people and getting to know the people over time, making or starting to work with them. As I said, work on real problems, work on real projects, work on real strategy questions. We got to know each other better in that time period of 2021, 2022, 2023. So the trust on both sides, getting to know each other, getting to know the colleagues there, also the founder, of course, and really being appreciated, but also appreciating the deep knowledge, the great personalities that we have there as a team. I think that was the key why I really wanted to join that team and work with them and pursue our mission, which is to bring genetic therapies to patients and to bring genetic medicine on the one hand side to rarer diseases, so-called monogenic diseases, but also to open up that space for a broader application of the gene therapy technology. And that goes then into areas like congestive heart failure or also like Parkinson's, because there's also a gene therapy approach to Parkinson's, where there are still sufficient levels of dopaminergic neurons, these key cells that regulate the motor functions of the human brains, and where there's still sufficient level of dopaminergic neurons there, and you can protect them from decline with the genetic medicine approach. So opening up gene therapies for broader applications, that's the mission of our company, and that's what we want to bring into reality. And that's, again, it's a long haul.
Thank you for sharing a little bit more about what you're doing in the company. One of the fascinating things I'm thinking about as you're talking is strategy. And you know, we're normally used to thinking about strategy for products that are out there, already exist. Yet here you're being tasked with thinking through strategy for things that will only be available in a number of years. Help us maybe understand a little bit how you go about strategic development in these kinds of conditions. And maybe you can give us an example of something concrete that you already worked on and had to sort of think through some unusual set of strategic questions that most of us who work with the sort of here and now are usually not faced with.
Yeah. So I think in these situations where we started in 2022 with our strategy process for AskBio was to understand our starting position, our A, where are we standing? And I phrased it in a way, what are our strengths that we really can rely on? And then you need to explore that. Of course, you know, we are a company that's based on AAV technology. So what are our strongholds where we really understand the AAV can deliver to a certain target area in the human body, where an indication is, the root cause of an indication is located. So where can we have the biggest impact, and where do we have the most knowledge, and where do we also have the scientific and technical credibility that this can work? And so we made that choices early on. But then it's also, as I mentioned before, about manufacturing. Do we have that in place? And do we have the right indications selected that also give an economic potential? Because in the end, we are a company that where all this investment also needs to make sense from an economic perspective. So that's the starting position, and understanding where really strong. It also leads you to some insights where you're not so strong and where you need to improve. And I'll maybe explore one area where we found over the last year where we need to improve. But then in a strategy, you also want to lay out 5 or 10 years from now, where do you want to be? And it took us really lots of discussion, lots of iterations to lay out our strategic ambitions. Where do we want to be in, let's say, the time frame of 2028 to 2032? Because that's that journey of 5 to 10 years that I've spoken about earlier, and that's also still a time frame from a corporate perspective that's appealing, but it can't be even longer term. And because we need to be realistic how fast we can deliver that, it can't be much more short term. So we have our ambition clear now in that 2028, 2032 time frame, and then what are the steps to really deliver that? And that leads me to one topic that we identified, which is professionalizing our therapeutic and product development efforts, because we now are also in the process of forming really the development teams around a core indication and around a core clinical program to really unite our forces and capabilities just around that one task to make that therapy work from all perspectives.
We're coming to towards the end of the interview, so I want to bring the focus back to you and maybe ask you just a few personal questions, and I hope I'm not going to intrude too much, but as you look now from what you have achieved, and you can look back over the last 10 years, what were some of the mistakes that you feel you've made where you could have done better, and what have you learned from them?
Well, I think certainly mistakes, when you come with the notion of pushing the boundaries, you also need to be careful that you don't overdo. And sometimes really pushing hard, you sometimes overdo. On a personal reflection to myself, I can sometimes be more careful or less direct. This is also feedback I receive sometimes, a bit too direct also, yes, from a, let's say, German background, working in different cultures. More US culture in the southern states is more indirect. So I had to learn how to really work there and how to collaborate there. But I think another reflection I want to offer is really, do you really want to have such a long haul in your career? For me, that's really appealing, to deliver something in a 5 to 10 year time frame. And yes, of course, we need to make progress this year, next year, in the next 3 months. And we plan for that. But in the end, the big result that we want to deliver is on a 5 to 10 year horizon. And that's appealing for me, but it's maybe not appealing for everyone. So that's one of the questions that you have to ask yourself.
And, there is probably a number of leaders out there watching or listening to our conversation who are thinking, I'm quite interested in actually making that new big jump. After all, we're going through throes of AI revolution, and many of our listeners or viewers might be thinking, maybe I want to jump into AI, or they might also want to go into gene therapy. What advice would you give them that you think would accelerate their transition into these new technological areas?
So for me, the key was recognizing, I have limited knowledge and limited understanding of the matter, and I need colleagues where we are, complementary, where we're really complementary. So working in teams, working with colleagues that bring complementary insights, capabilities, knowledge was key for me on the whole journey. At the very beginning, to actually understand that space through many eyes, through many lenses, listening to the group of people, and then with the group of people extracting really the essence of what we learned, and then applying that learning. And again, it comes back to teamwork for me. And the insight towards yourself, you are limited. So you need to work with others to really make it work.
And last question. So much of our conversation has been about the last 10 years and some of the key successes and some of the key learnings that you've had over the last 10 years. Now, I'm sure you have another 10 wonderful years ahead of you, if not more, of your career. What's in store for you for the next 10 years? Do you have another paper for the next 10 years? And if so, what might be in it?
Let us explore that potential of genetic therapies. Let's make it work for the different therapeutic approaches of AskBio. As I said, there are still some years ahead of us, but we want to keep it in the time frame that we have laid out and not let it slip, so that it works in that time frame.
Thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I've learned a lot, and good luck with everything, and hope we'll get to speak to each other again in 10 years to summarize what you've achieved.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.